Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 76, JKROFLCOPTR. I am Bon Diesel. The EchoCast is a podcast about The Division 2, its community, news about it, and just random things I want to talk about, including other games and sometimes completely unrelated things entirely. Today, we will not have a State of the Game recap like I was hoping. We will be talking about the postponement of the return of State of the Game. I'm going to talk a little bit about Gears of War 5, politics and games, listener questions, personal and content updates. If you would like to support this podcast and my other content, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. I want to welcome Darren as the newest patron, and I want to offer my thanks to you for your support of the podcast and my other stuff. Thanks to Gray, Hassan, Joe, Jose, Luis, Mike, Ozzy, and Tim for helping support the show and my content. For transparency reasons, the money I'm collecting through my Patreon and all my other sources, the podcast and Twitch and so on and so forth, is being saved to get a new office chair, a nicer mic setup, probably going with a non-USB solution eventually, and to just simply justify the time spent to Bay Diesel, so I can keep all of this stuff going, because I'm still enjoying it, even if it's a little bit of a struggle. Okay, let's jump into State of the Game recap. No State of the Game this week. As most of you probably know, on Tuesday there was a State of the Game announced for Wednesday, Wednesday morning for me in the States. But unfortunately, this morning, they announced that it was being postponed. I always try to be one to not be sensational and not get overly upset about my fun little hobby here. Try to be a cool-headed influence who's always willing to call out people who are, I think, being less than genuine and being full of shit. That said, we need some info. Whether it's in the form of like an intelligence annex, which we haven't really had one of those since the release of the game, really. There's been some updates about some of the DLCs, but it's just kind of regurgitated stuff we already knew. Or some type of write-up from someone like Julian Garrity or another higher up. Similar to like what the Destiny 2 dev or the lead dev has done in some of their little diaries that they've been putting out. If you listen to my show consistently, you'll know I've been fine with the break that they've been taking, because if you've been around this community long enough, you'll know that end of summer, there's pretty much always a lack of information. There's lots of vacations and stuff like that, but to a point, that's not a full excuse to kind of completely leave us wanting for more. I've said before as well that I've always appreciated that Massive and Ubisoft in general seem to be really against developer crunch, which is awesome. And I don't expect Fortnite levels of updates and so on and so forth. I don't want that, because the devs I interact with seem to be happy, and I don't want them to have to work so much that they're no longer happy, because they're making video games for mostly a bunch of adults and some kids, I'm sure. But this should be a fun situation for everyone and not be awful for anyone. That said, I do know that in hindsight, even since I typed up my notes for this podcast today, I know that they said that Chris Gansler was sick. Apparently that was kind of the crux. I don't know this for a fact, but I believe that Hamish is actually still on vacation for at least another week or so. At least that's the impression I got from when I think he said something on Twitter about having to come off his vacation to attend State of the Game if they were going to do it. So, it kind of is what it is. I suspect if they announced it on Tuesday that they truly intended on doing it, or else they wouldn't have announced it. And then if they canceled it or postponed it, I will assume that it truly had to be postponed and there were no other options. I really do believe we've actually gotten a lot of updates on the game. We're way ahead of where we were with Division 1 when it comes to updates, transparency, even though it may not feel like it. But getting credit for that only kind of carries you so far with people. And as people are getting bored with existing content, especially with the expedition being, kind of lukewarmed, receptioned, and then being taken away entirely, and people getting frustrated with the current mechanics that need to be fixed or replaced, that doing a good job for the first few months of the game, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your outlook, isn't going to permanently have people off your ass. At the end of the day, I'm sure that they would have had the state of the game, if they could have. There's lots of reasons. Chris being sick. I know the ETF members are showing up if they haven't already had their first day. I don't really know their schedule. There could have been various issues that, on top of just what we know. But what I really actually hate about this is just that it just feeds the trolls, Luckily, at this point, I've basically rid myself of all the people who I'd put in that category. I do want to be clear that I'm not talking about anyone who says anything bad about the game. I follow and pay attention to plenty of people who don't always have the nicest things to say about the division. But who I don't bother with are people who basically have nothing to say, who just kind of vomit on the floor and roll around in it. Or people who are just constantly negative and just can't seem to find a single good thing to say ever. So while I don't necessarily see it, I can only imagine that this this cancellation today was just fodder for the people who enjoy sharing their misery with everyone else. And I just kind of hate when things happen that kind of give those people more ammunition. But more than anything, I just want some more info. I'm excited. I'm curious. I want to know what's coming. There's a bunch of good games coming out in the next few months, and I know people are kind of looking for what like the division's answer is going to be with episode 2, with other updates, and then eventually episode 3 at the beginning of next year. I think people are expecting something big because the first episode was cool. The expedition was a little bit of a letdown, I think, for most. And so I think people are really hoping that the Pentagon and then New York City are going to be big and make up for it. But we will have to wait until hopefully next week for the state of the game to find out what's going on with updates, with changes, with PTSs. I suspect they'll talk a bit about the ETF, but they're not going to give you any of the information you really want to hear about ETF. I'll put $100 on that. They aren't going to tell you what you want, but that's okay. So there was my state of the game recap. That didn't happen. Division 2 and just gaming news in general. It's mostly just gaming news. Gears of War 5 was released. It's really interesting. I personally am someone who's never been into Gears of War, like basically at all. I found the theme to be kind of overly macho and lame. What I've learned from watching some of the reviews is that actually in Gears 4, I guess that kind of old school, kind of goofy way of treating the genre or the franchise kind of changed, and they got a little more serious and a little more, less bro-y. And it sounds like they've continued that with 5. So I actually may be willing to check it out, because if you have Xbox Game Pass, which is only $10 a month, and a lot of people, including myself, paid I think $10 to have it for like the next 2 years, you can get it on Game Pass. You can pay $10, play it for 2 weeks, and then end your Game Pass subscription, and you pay $10 to play that game. But then you'll see the 100 other games that are worth playing on that Game Pass. And Game Pass is a great deal. If you're an Xbox user, I highly suggest just going biting the bullet and just doing it. But more than anything, Gears of War 5, the story's getting good talk. The graphics is, it sounds like even on the One X, it's just amazing. The facial animations and the cutscenes and all that. There's a few little complaints I've seen, but nothing really that big. It really seems like Xbox finally has its exclusive game that they can slap on the table and say, look at that, look at how pretty it is. And I think that's good, and I really hope that's the start of a trend for Xbox as we move into the next generation. And this game definitely seems like it's going to be one of those transition titles to a point. Obviously, the new systems are at least are more than a year out, but I suspect that they're still going to kind of talk about this game, Gears of War 5, as being kind of like one of the flagships of like, you think this looks good on One X, wait till you see it on Xbox 57 or whatever they're going to call it. I don't know. More than anything for me, I just think it's cool to revive a storied franchise in gaming. On the 360, Gears of War was one of the biggest games around, and while I never got into it, I know that for a fact there were a lot of people who were really into it, for PvP, for the story. Some of them just really liked kind of the ultra macho thing. My thoughts personally, I'm gonna try it out. I have the Game Pass, I might as well check it out. Not really expecting to get stuck into it that much, but I don't need to. This game maybe wasn't meant for me, but the same way I talked about a lot of other games is, Destiny and so on. Just because I don't personally care for the games doesn't mean that I don't respect their place. Well, I did find it interesting in a couple of reviews I read and watched about Gears of War 5 was talking about how Xbox actually did something kind of impressive by, this game is very reminiscent of the games made in like the early and mid 2000s, that no one makes anymore. These like action-packed games with shooting and this fast-moving story and all that. A point that I believe it was Skill Up made was talking about how, while Sony is known for its incredible exclusives, that in a way they're all kind of the same thing. This gritty, third person, story complete, completely just a story game, not much more to it than that. Horizon Zero Dawn kind of breaks the mold a bit, but not really that much. But I can't even remember. So you have like The Last of Us, whatever the newer zombie one was, that they all just kind of they're kind of the same pattern. They're amazing. They're system sellers. There's a reason the PlayStation has doubled up Xbox this gen, but there's probably more to that as well. But I'm just happy to see Xbox put out something that's gonna be a system seller, even if it was in the last year of the current gen. But I'm really hoping that this is kind of a pattern. I'm hoping that Halo breaks the mold the same way, and we'll have to see what else they have in store for the next gen. The other little thing is I made kind of a quip on Twitter, and I figured I don't have a whole lot to talk about during this podcast, so I'll jump into this because this is a nightmare. Politics. Specifically, kind of the whole thing about Ubisoft games aren't political. There was an article from September 3rd on GameIndustry.biz by James Batchelor, featuring Yves Guillemot. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The head guy there at Ubisoft, talking about his stance on politics in their games, and Ubisoft's kind of stance has been like, we don't want to deal too much in the real politics because we don't want to distract people from the game, which is fine. But there has been this weird thing where they say that, and then they put out a game like The Division and Division 2. In Division 2, it's based in DC, of all places, where you literally are showing, like the government and politics and underhanded and backstabbing. In Far Cry 5, you literally had a Mountain West, religious cult, even though that ended up being a huge, dry bummer, and that all the cool parts of a cult you could have, they completely whitewashed and made it as boring as they could have, even though I actually still really like that game. Watch Dogs, I dealt with like racism and stuff like that, and now Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which just had this trailer that's just basically, we're not really talking about current politics, wink wink. I don't know, it was kind of funny. All of these games have had political implications of some type, and while they may not be a commentary on the real world, it's still a commentary. What's interesting is that we live in a time where other games have gotten flack for lots of things, including Cyberpunk. Some people are mad that they're removing sexes, that you don't pick to be a male or a female, you just pick your body type and decide on your own. Even on the other side of it, a game company recently, that the game had transphobic jokes, and at first they kind of apologized, and then they just kind of went all in on it. And just other controversies that are, like games being blamed for, shooting violence that has been happening, mass shootings and stuff like that in the U.S. For me, it's interesting. I think an issue like this is way too big for me to pretend I can wrap my mind around it, and it's really just way too complicated for someone who's kind of dumb like myself to have any real insight on. But like, I personally don't really care if a company pushes the agenda. I just kind of want them to own it. Like, I don't mind that Ubisoft has all these games that have some like really blatant political commentary, but I also kind of don't want to see this well, we're not really commentating. We just want to leave it to fun in the games, I wish they'd kind of own it a bit. That's a little weak-handed in my opinion. When it comes to like how Cyberpunk is moving to the whole idea of no sexes and stuff like that. Like, I mean, I'm from the Midwest in the United States. I've always lived in very conservative areas. I'm not gonna act like I get all of that stuff, but I'll sure as hell tell you it doesn't bother me. If this kind of stuff bothers you, honestly, it's probably more of a commentary on you and your own problems than anyone else's. Like, are they pandering? Are they doing all that stuff? I don't know, maybe, but I don't know, it doesn't hurt me. It's probably not hurting you. I don't know. That's just my outlook on it, but what do I know? One of the more interesting things that's kind of on this topic that it popped up when Division 1 came out, and it popped up again when Division 2 came out, and it kind of flamed out as it should. But I've had people I respect kind of say that there's more to it than you would think, and the whole idea of the Division in general. If you look at what the Division is it's essentially a bunch of unregulated government agents killing American citizens with no due process or really any rules at all. And so, with Division 2 specifically, I remember after it came out, there were some kind of goofy articles written about how it's like Tucker Carlson, who's a very conservative, borderline far right wing political commentator in the United States, saying it's like his wet dream and stuff like that. And what I found so funny is that, like, I kind of get it, even though I disagree with it. But I think every time I'd see those things pop up, what cracked me up more than anything is how the idea that the Division is this wet dream for some especially kind of right leaning or right wing political party, and just knowing that, at least in my experience, Ubisoft in general, and specifically Massive in Sweden, is just like one of the most diverse left leaning liberal strongholds I've ever interacted with. And so the idea of them, they just accidentally churn out this game that some people think is this like ultra right wing or whatever. I don't know, it just kind of made me laugh. I remember when I saw that. I get some people's issue with the Division, and what I actually like about Division 2 is I feel like there was a little bit of commentary or some recognition of this whole thing of like, we kind of have a bunch of people running around with all this super tech that kind of get to do whatever they want, and there's no recourse. I get it, but I don't think it's a topic worth getting too upset about. Personally, I mean, I lean left politically, and I guess these things don't bother me as much because I'm definitely in the idea of just like, I don't know, if it makes you happy and doesn't hurt me, you do you, for the most part, unless it's a bad gaming opinion specifically about Division 2, and then I'm gonna shit my pants and Twitter at you. But other than that, I just I think I kind of get why people would be upset on both sides about this stuff, but more than anything, I guess my point here and the whole deal here is just kind of like Ubisoft specifically, but really any gaming company that takes a stance one way or the other, just own it. Maybe don't try to be so don't try not always be so neutral. I don't want politics in my games necessarily, but if you're gonna go there, you might as well go all the way. But what do I know? What I do know is that it's mid-roll time, so roughly the next 60 seconds, there's going to be me talking about something else, probably way louder than this audio. Be right back. Okay, so community topics and discussion. I'm gonna be straight up. Wasn't much to talk about this podcast. I was really banking on the state of the game. So I'm gonna talk about a little topic here. Do we expect too much? Then I'm gonna go into a few questions from Nitro, a listener, then some content updates, and then I am bouncing out of here to give a little baby a bath. So, but in the community topics and discussion, do we expect too much or not enough? So Division 2 is obviously a relevant topic for this because, while I would argue we've had pretty consistent updates, the last, 4 to 6 weeks have been slow to say the least. And the last DLC, like I've said before, while I think that overall episode 1 was a solid update, what was supposed to be the biggest part of it, the expedition, left a bit to be desired. But I still, even with Division 1, where Division 1 did make the mistake in its lead up of showing a game that we never really got. Unfortunately, in the early 20 teens, Ubisoft had kind of a run of showing games that we never really got. Whether it was the first Watch Dogs, even Assassin's Creed to a point, the first Division, even I think the first Division ended up being a really cool game. If you look at the trailers and the lead up to it, we were kind of being sold a product that we never actually got. And in fact, if you watch some of those old trailers, you'll see that Division 2 is pretty darn close to the game that we were promised at first, which I actually don't think is a bad thing, but we'll go past that. My whole thing is, when it comes to this, one of the explanations for the lack of updates that I think is reasonable is that there's they've been taking vacations and stuff like that. Now, first off, don't assume that that's like an Ubisoft is amazing thing. Obviously, they do seem to be good to their employees. My impression is that in Sweden, if you own a business there, even if you're owned by a foreign entity like Massive is, there's still rules about how much vacation time people get and stuff like that, and it's very generous there. I am not under the impression that the people who work at Red Storm in North Carolina get 5 weeks off just for fun every year. So while I am happy to commend Massive and Ubisoft, this break that the Division 2 has been on is also just because of where they are. But I guess there comes down to a point of like, would I trade them being able to do that to get a new update every 3 weeks for the Division? And I know I'm gonna sound like a homer. I'm gonna white knight it, I guess. But I wouldn't, because when I speak to the devs I speak to and to the community managers and stuff, they seem to like their jobs. And I've, in situations where they could have complained about things like crunch and so on and so forth, I haven't gotten those complaints. Maybe I'm not asking the right questions. Maybe I'm not in confidence the person they want to talk to about those things. But, when you look at, a big topic lately has been Fortnite versus Apex Legends, and how Fortnite was the king, Apex came out, took over for a while, but then people got bored and went back to Fortnite because Fortnite puts out updates like every 3 days. I know that's not true, but it sure feels like it. And even though they're not always received well, and in fact the last few I think haven't been, they're still putting them out like crazy, and they're at least keeping people talking. Where even like Apex, went months without really doing anything significant. And they came out, and Respawn came out and said, like, hey, we're not going to work our people 65, 70 hours a week to put out content. It's just not how we're going to do this. Which was kind of a veiled shot at Fortnite and Epic, and that, there's lots of rumors and lots of talk that is an issue in that company. And for me, I'm fine with that. Now, I'm also a 31-year-old man who just had a baby. So honestly, this Division lull has been basically perfect for me because nothing's happened during the craziest time of my life. So I have to admit that if a big update came out like 2 weeks ago, I'd be bummed because I simply wouldn't be able to spend the time on it I want. beyond my own personal feeling about it, I still am okay with them not being pushed the same way that some devs may. Now that said, I still think that, it's reasonable for people to want to push and want updates, especially fixes and changes to make the game more enjoyable, which is a big topic right now with Division 2. But I really think that there's a fine line there, and I don't ever want it to get pushed to the point of like, and I don't think this will happen, but I don't think we should ever expect crunch and expect that. Talking about expectations, I do kind of wonder, how hype impacts all this stuff and how it may hurt and how it may help. A game like The Division, really all games now, you're talking about, there's some games that sneak out that people haven't really talked about, and people get really excited about them. Two games that came out recently for me, Vigor, the Xbox exclusive Escape from Tarkov type of game, and Remnant. Vigor is more of a personal example, but Remnant is a game that it doesn't really seem like anyone saw coming. It came out and people really like it. People are very impressed by it. So there wasn't really any hype for it. It came out and it's really good. And that's such a cool feeling, because since there was no hype, people kind of took it for what it was and were maybe even more impressed because there was no hype. But then you look at basically every other AAA game that's come out in the last 5-6 years, and you see the hype build, and at least for me, every single time the hype builds, and there's just no way, no matter how good or bad the game is, that it will ever meet that hype. And it's not the game's fault. It's probably impossible to meet that hype. Division 1 and Division 1 definitely suffered from that, and that wasn't entirely the community's fault. That was Ubisoft as well. But even games like Destiny, especially Destiny 2, I remember there being so much hype about Destiny 2, and then it came out and it kind of piddled away. I'll talk about that more in the next little topic, but Anthem, holy crap, in a game I see it happening to in the next 6, 7, 8 months, whatever, is it's gonna happen to Cyberpunk. And let me make very clear, I'm not saying that Cyberpunk is gonna be a bad game. Cyberpunk's probably gonna be a really good game, probably gonna be game of the year next year, or at least definitely a contender for it. But what I'm saying is that even if it is really good, even if it is game of the year, I think Cyberpunk is at a point now that there's no way it can meet expectations. They just did a live stream in the last few days, or last week, where they showed off a bunch more of the game. And I liked it. I liked it because it kind of made it look like a real game. And for me, it lowered my hype a bit in a really good way. Where instead of this kind of false promise of the world's open, anything can happen, there's a billion possibilities, I now realize that there's like 50 possibilities, and that's cool. That's a lot. But I feel like hype is a dangerous thing with all this, and with expectations and stuff like that. And I feel like we're kind of at a point now where any game with any notoriety gets hyped to the point where it can't meet that hype, no matter how amazing it is. And yeah, I don't know how that's gonna go moving forward. And I think short memories are a problem. It's been really kind of smile inducing to watch so many people post pictures of Twitch viewership and so on and so forth. And what's really interesting is for me to watch, there's so many people on my timeline right now who are just loving Destiny 2, and that's honestly really cool. I've made it very known that Destiny 2 isn't really my thing. I swear I tried, I just can't do it. It's not my game. But I'm really happy that people are enjoying it. But it's very interesting to me that the same people who are really enjoying it are happy to rip all over the Division, in Division 2. And what's so interesting about it to me is that it just shows me how short our memories can be, and that up until basically Forsaken, through the first 2 DLCs for Destiny 2, that game was bad. It was a bad game. I would say substantially worse than Division 2 in its current state. You know, it's hard to compare a game that's been out for a couple years to one that's been out for 7 months or whatever. But you know, if you look at both of those games 7 months in, I even the Division 2 in its kind of stale state at the moment, I think it's a substantially better game than Destiny 2 was. I know Destiny 2 reviews were kind of up and down. It kind of depended on if a Destiny 2 reviewer basically just played the campaign and then reviewed it, or if they really dug into the end game. Because people who dug into the end game were kind of like, this game's not very good, people. It's a big regression from the first one, actually. But people who just played for like 10 hours and then reviewed it loved it because it had a few new things, right? Where, again, our short memories, I mean, Division 2 was one of the best reviewed games I've seen this year from its initial release. Obviously, you know, kind of the same deal when people got to Endgame. Endgame was better than the first Division, right? But still wasn't great. And even after a bunch of updates, it's still not perfect and it needs some work. But people are forgetting that Division 2 was critically acclaimed. And I think that's interesting. So I guess my whole point of this is, I personally believe that the way that Destiny 2 kind of rose from the ashes of its release, I don't think the Division 2 needs to raise from ashes. I think it's just kind of chilling above the ground. And it can, you know, if treated the right way, be incredible and really resurge, you know, the way it should and the way I hope it does. But I just really think that we need to consider our memories when doing this stuff. And then just comparing games in general, I think is so tough. You know, even within like the looter shooter genre, you know, sure, you can compare Anthem and Destiny and the Division and Warframe, I guess. But like, I would argue that of all those games, Division is almost a completely different game, other than the fact that you collect stuff. But in really in a way, like, I think it's hard to compare any of those games, other than in their like broad overreaching kind of genre outlook. And then just like comparing games on Twitch and stuff like that, like, it's still, I know I come back to it a lot, but it's just those stupid posts I see people throw up sometimes, or they'll be like, oh, Division only has 500 people watching right now, game is dead, rip. I'm just like, yeah, it's not a very fun game to watch on Twitch right now. You know, when the raid came out, there were plenty of people watching it. So, you know, unfortunately, these looter shooters kind of, you know, wane and you know, go up and down. You know, Destiny has quite a bit of content out at this point, so it can kind of hold people a little bit more, it seems. But like, I'm gonna be straight up, if you look at the top 20 games on the Twitch viewing right now, I'm interested in like Apex, a little bit of PUBG, and that's about it. I could care less about League of Legends, World of Warcraft, like. So I don't know. To me, it's just funny that, like, I personally could give a crap less, you know, how many people are watching a game on Twitch, because I recognize that the vast majority of quote unquote popular games on Twitch are games I have zero interest in. And I've argued for a long time that a game like The Division, I don't think is really shooting to be a top Twitch game. I don't think that was the goal. I don't think, you know, just as I've said before, that the goal of Division 2 was not to make people Twitch partners, was not to be a streamer's game. You know, it honestly seems like a game that was made for people who wanted to play it. You know, there's obviously a community who enjoys streaming it and who enjoys watching it. Not a very big one, apparently, and that's okay. I just think all the comparisons are just weird, especially in genre. I really like The Division, but I've almost found that I like The Division despite the fact that it's a looter shooter and not because of it. So, you know, like when people compare, you know, and then just wait for the Ghost Recon Breakpoint comparisons to The Division. Just wait, it's coming, and you'll know why when this beta comes out. But where the comparison should be Assassin's Creed Odyssey to Breakpoint. One, because they're on the same engine, and two, because they try to do way more things similar than Breakpoint's doing to The Division. But I'll leave that for another day. I'm sure I'll be talking about Breakpoint next week. The beta comes out tomorrow, and I plan on streaming it and probably making a video or two about it. I'm hoping that what I've seen before is all changed and fixed, and I'll start at Breakpoint and love it, but we will see. And then the last bit about this, expectations and do we expect too much, is just transparency, right? Because there's one thing about like the Division, it's so funny. People's opinions on how good the Division does at being transparent is completely dependent on where the game's at any given moment. You'll see sometimes people saying, "Oh my gosh, these guys, they give us so much information. They're so amazing. This is so great." And then at other times, like right now, basically, they've abandoned the game. The game is dead. So while I think they've actually done a pretty good job overall, I also think that they should always be striving to do better. The communication about the expedition and how it was going to end and be taken away, that could have been done better. And I've had multiple CMs directly and in my chat on my stream and just on Twitter, say, yeah, we effed that up. That it seems like communication between the different parts of Ubisoft and Massive isn't their strong suit all the time. It seems like the head's not always talking to the tail. And I genuinely still believe that everyone has the right intentions. It's just that there some issues there, but I'm not in there enough to know. I'm not in there at all, so that's mere speculation from me. But yeah, so I don't know. There was my rant for the podcast to make it more than 20 minutes long. Moving to some questions here. Nitro asked 3 questions. The first one being, do you think live service games provide enough intrinsic value? Examples of yes or no. I don't know. I think it depends on what people want from them. So the way I take this question is, do live service games, do they like provide enough in general, enough gameplay, enough, deep experiences, so you look at a game like The Last of Us, and obviously people really enjoy that game, even though I've seen a few people say they don't. But people remember that experience. Do we have any moments like that with The Division, with Anthem, with Destiny, or because the games are kind of designed to be played over and over and over and over again, and just add new stuff and never look back, kind of. I would say no, and I would say that's probably why. And I guess the best example I have is that I have, and I understand what I'm about to say is not popular, but I have just had this scratch in the back of my throat and back of my brain or whatever for probably 6 months or so now, where I've just really wondered what The Division would be like if it was a story-based, regular single-player, realistic damage model type of game, a la old Ghost Recon games or SOCOM, or those type of experiences. And so I don't know if that's just a curiosity or if it's that I feel like we would. For me, a big part of it is I don't think that the live service gaming genre, or whatever you want to call it, method, is very good at telling stories. I know some people really like Destiny's story. From what I've seen of it and played through, especially a lot of Destiny 2, I don't get it. It is just the cheesiest, lamest thing I've ever done in my entire life. But maybe it's just I don't like space magic, ninja, jumpy jump things. I don't know. So I don't know. I think that live service games provide value, but maybe not depth. Nitro's second question is the community involvement or interaction substituted or used to enhance intrinsic value in a game? So how I take that is, is the assumed community interaction, so matchmaking and stuff like that, kind of a crutch for the makers of live games to replace actually fun experiences in that game? And I would say yeah. I mean, you see so many people say it. Even that game like Ghost Recon Wildlands is probably my best example of that. I would say that was a live service game, if you look at the way that they updated it and stuff. And I would say the average person would say that game on its own, playing by yourself, Obviously, I have my opinions that are way worse than that, but I've almost seen to a T people say a game like Wildlands with 3 friends is amazing, is a blast. And it's not because the game is necessarily good, but it's because it provides a really fun co-op experience. And so I would say a game like that, which I think of as a live service game, absolutely uses its co-op and community involvement and interaction to make up for what is kind of a lackluster game in general. Then the final question from Nitro is, do live service games rely on community? Okay, that's kind of the same question. But I would say, yeah, I believe that they do maybe depend on personal, interactions in the community too much to kind of make up for maybe some lack of depth in the games, in live service games. Something I've said, kind of my example from before, where I said that a part of me kind of wants to see a completely different type of Division game. I'm hoping, and I've thrown this out, and I know it's not going to happen, but if we found out that the 3rd episode of the Division 2 DLC, the New York City release, ends up being like a 5-hour story-based DLC where you get on a helicopter and play play through a 5-hour completely single player with co-op, I guess, story mode, basically, where it's not a looter shooter during that time. Sure, you could get rewards at the end or something like that, I don't know, but if it really just tries to tell a story, and I not only would I be okay with that, I would prefer it significantly. I kind of want to see them be able to kind of throw away worrying about balance and gear sets and attributes and stats, and just be able to take this really, really cool concept and this lore and all of this depth that the story can have in Division, and just really, really use it and flex that narrative muscle. And then, because I think that live games in general kind of throw that out the window and just kind of rely on people picking up shiny things and playing with other people. So there's my answers. Thank you, Nitro. If you have any questions, make sure to leave questions. I put up a Twitter post. You can leave them in my Patreon. You can leave it on the YouTube comments. You can go to my Discord. You can message me. Shit, I don't know. You can email me, bondieseltwitch@gmail.com. You can let me know. I always ask. We don't always get a ton of questions, but I'm happy to answer when we do. For some personal content updates, Baby Diesel and Bay Diesel are doing great. They actually just popped in the middle of my recording here. We're about to give little Baby Diesel a bath. Doing really well, no major updates. She's just getting chubby, which is good. She's putting on weight. We have an appointment in a few weeks to see how she's doing. She's kind of sleeping more now, but now that I said that, she'll probably be up all night, and Bay Diesel will hate me. But yeah, everything's good on that front. I will try to not post too many pictures of her, but I have been trying to put a few up on Twitter whenever I have something funny to say. When it comes to content and stuff, I'm kind of waiting on more Division 2 info and updates before I get back into the videos and stuff. Even streams, I've been streaming Vigor instead, because there's a few things left for me to do on Division. Maybe I'll stream it a little bit, but probably not much until we get more stuff. I do want to get back to doing some of the Intel Insights videos, where I would go over the intel that you pick up. I did it for all of the intel in the first game. And I started doing it in Division 2 and then kind of got busy and stopped. So I plan on getting back into that. I do want to continue pushing through with this podcast, even though, like this one, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about. So you might be able to tell I'm kind of stretching the best I can, but I want to keep going, and I really don't plan on stopping this anytime soon. I want to get back to streaming at least 2 times a week, maybe 3 or 4 if I can swing it. But baby's got priority. Given Bay Diesel a break has got priority. As that stuff theoretically calms down, I'll try to be more active. But it's gonna be family first. So there's that. And to wrap this stuff up, if you want to support the podcast and my other content, please check out the Patreon at patreon.com/theechocast. If you're on iTunes, please rate the podcast and leave a review. Helps me get noticed. On Twitch, I am Bond Diesel, where I am trying to stream at least a few times a week. On Twitter, I am also Bond Diesel, where you can see my opinions and word vomit if you want. If you don't want that, but you do want Division 2 info, check out the Twitter account, the Division 2 Hub. That is my Division 2 only account, where I basically try to leave out all of my opinion. I do a little self promo on there, but for the most part, I just try to retweet cool stuff, post about cool stuff I've seen, and try to give updates on the game as needed. And that's what I've got. That's all I have this week. Hopefully next week I have a state of the game to recap. And until next time.